you should be able to prep nearly every ingredient and recipe with two knives. A primary chef's knife or gyuto, and then a secondary prep utility or petty. These are the two knives to rule them all. Got to throw a little Lord of the Rings in there. This video is going to be a little bit odd because my job is to film and write content around knives, so hopefully you who view this will buy a bunch of them. But the reality is, as I just explained, you don't necessarily need a bunch of knives. Need versus want are two very different things. In this video, I'm going to break down primary options and secondary options, and then I'm going to get into the third, fourth, and possibly hybrid that covers the two that you may need depending on how often you're prepping and cooking certain ingredients. Let's dive in. Okay, I'm going to break this down in two ways. I'm going to give you the short and sweet, and then I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty nuance knife nerd detail that I like to do in these videos so you can really spot key features of these different knives that may or may not work for you. So here's the short and sweet. The very first knife that you need in your collection is a full-size 8-inch chef's knife / 210mm gyuto, which is about an 8 1/4 inch. Let's just say 8 inches across the board, regardless of whether it's a Western German style knife or a Japanese. This is what you're getting with these blades. Let's start with just an OG here. Full bolster, full tang, fully forged, Wüsthof Classic Blueberry. This is your iconic German chef's knife. 8-inch blade. You get a straight back profile with a nice curvature at the tip there. This knife is fantastic for any cutting technique. Now, let's take it up to a Japanese option like this Enzo olive wood. We have an octagonal olive wood handle with a 8-inch blade, various finishes, Damascus, cladding, sashimi finish, but don't pay attention to that. Look at the blade profile. It's mostly straight at the back, and then there's a curvature at the tip. Again, this can handle any cutting technique. The way it feels in your hand is going to be very different than that Wüsthof, but the knives are capable for nearly everything. So there's two big things that both these knives and everything in this row have. One would be the length, roughly 8 inches or 8 1/4 in that ballpark, and then they all have a point. If this is your primary, you're going to need a pointed tip. Why? Well, let's say you want to break down some broccoli florets off of a big crown and you need to be able to use the tip to get in there. That's where you need the tip. Let's say that you occasionally get a whole cut of, say, a pork loin or a beef tenderloin or anything where you are required to trim off some fat or silver skin. You need that point to be able to pierce and get in there. There's also plenty of other things you can use the tip for with a knife like this, but again, we're keeping this part simple. This is your primary, it's your everyday driver. It's what you're going to generally grab first before anything, even before your secondary. Now, there are some alternatives to this, which you'll have to watch later on in the video to get to that. Your secondary would be described in titles of these knives as either a petty, a utility, a prep, or in some cases, a Honesuki or a Ko-Bunka. So this would be this row over here. This is an example of a utility knife. Notice that there's not much of a heel here. It's very, very shallow, and this has a very straight blade profile. It's not as triangular as some of the others. This is a decent option for your secondary. Ideally, what you want to get is a petty or a utility. What's the difference real quick? Basically, a petty is the Japanese version of a utility knife, or you could say a utility knife is the Western, German, US version of a petty knife. Generally speaking, utility knives are going to be a little bit straighter and more narrow in their edge profile and their blade shape like this one, whereas a lot of petties will have a bit more of a heel to them like this Yoshikane. The benefit of this more triangular blade shape with this heel and the length in that 4.5 at the lower end up to 6 inches long is that this secondary knife has a bit of heel height. So depending on the curvature of the blade, you can get into a little bit of a tap or a push without cramming your knuckles into the board. And if you're holding it like this and you're just coming straight down in the handle, obviously you're going to hit. But if you just change the positioning of your hand where your fingers are up more to the side of the blade, and because of how light and nimble these knives are, you don't need a big grip, which the reality is you don't need a huge grip on any of these knives, and that's a whole other story, but you can get into a nice tap or push, you can slice, you can pierce because you have a pointed tip, and this narrow blade profile along with the length will allow you to break down a chicken, fillet a fish, trim whole proteins like pork loin, brisket, chuck roast, whatever it may be. The secondary is going to be, you have something real quick to do at home. Let's say you're just making a salad or a sandwich. You got to slice up some cucumber or pickles or tomato, some lettuce, whatever it may be. You can just grab this real quick. You don't necessarily need to grab your full-size knife. You can. In some ways, it is more efficient. You get a longer blade, you get a little bit more weight, which is going to help you get through product with more ease. But the reality is this is kind of your just go-to quick task. This is your workhorse. This is where you're going to be prepping larger meals with. Now, even in a professional kitchen setting, I only worked in kitchens for a brief time, so I'm not going to pretend to be the absolute expert here. But all you have to do is watch some cooking shows or talk to some friends who do, which I have plenty of friends that are in kitchens. They are not using a different specialty knife for every single different type of thing, unless they're doing that thing repetitively. Do you need a curved boning knife? Maybe. It could be nicer to have. I love it for brisket, but will this do the trick? Yeah, it'll totally do the trick. So your primary is your workhorse, your secondary is there when you need it. That, in a nutshell, is the shorter version of me saying you don't need a knife set. And you don't need a bunch of specialty knives for different things. These two will handle 99% of kitchen tasks that you need to do with a knife. Now, short and sweet again. Let's say that you are cooking whole cuts of meat, rib roast, chuck roast. Maybe you just like to make a bunch of meatloaf and they're pretty decent size. Pork loin, tenderloin, you get it. Brisket, big cuts of meat. And you're not just doing this on the holidays during the summer with the smoker. This is something where you are regularly cooking smoked meats or big roasts. Then you may want to entertain getting a slicer. A slicer is going to be 9+ inches long. It's going to have a more narrow blade height in the sense of this way, it's width in the way you're looking at it, but this is actually what we call height. This height is going to minimize the amount of drag and resistance going into your food. Slicing brisket, it'll fall better, it won't stick to the side of the blade, it's longer, it's thinner, and this is fantastic for slicing both raw and cooked proteins. Some people even use slicers for certain vegetable prep as well. And because of how narrow this Yaxle ray is, you could even use this to break down different larger produce like that broccoli I said. You could trim meats with it. There's a lot of things you could do with this knife. And the heel height is similar to some of those I showed you earlier. It's just longer. So you're going from 8 inches to 9+. The next is, let's say that you are baking bread on a regular basis, or you're buying whole unsliced loaves from the grocery store or your favorite bakery. And I don't mean you're just getting it for Christmas and Thanksgiving as a special thing for your French onion soup. I mean, you're doing this on a regular basis. This is your primary way that you are consuming bread. If that's the case, then you would like to get yourself a bread knife. Now, a bread knife has jagged, pointed teeth that dig into your crusty outer layer so that you can get through that nice crispy crunch, while at the same time, they essentially slice and almost tear a little bit with the teeth at softer sandwich bread so you don't smush it. Excellent. Fourth knife. So, two knives to rule them all. I can't believe I messed up my Lord of the Rings little pun. 2 knives to rule them all, possibly a slicer, maybe a bread knife. And that's it. The 2 primaries and then your secondaries. Well, really it's 1 primary, secondary, and then your specialty because you're using them regularly. That is the short version of everything here. Now, let's dive a bit deeper for all of those who just have the time and really want to understand some of the nuance between these different types of knives. I'm going to go back to this Wüsthof.